This is my first book. I first started getting my articles published 5 years ago now. It's something I've always wanted to do, and I don't know, various things were stopping me, you know, sort of psychological, I don't know, whatever, taking risks. I mean, my book is very controversial, it's very political, it's got a very clear message that I basically don't like global capitalism and I think we should look for an alternative. And if I was going to write, that was how I was going to be, how I would write. So for a long time I thought, nah, let's not do it. I thought, the hell of it, you only live once, and I've not regretted it at all. It's been brilliant. I've had so many exciting things happen to me all the time. I mean, just at South Bank here, it's lovely connecting with the Vice Chancellor, and I've been on a radio programme. Just literally today, a news article went up on Red Pepper website, you know, the Red Green Journal. I've got articles in various journals, so Managed Information, Business Information Review. I've got a paper in the House of Lords, report on globalisation. I thought that's pretty good to get it in as sort of the conformist House of Lords, which almost seems like more of a debating chamber today than the House of Commons, really. My book is a culmination of my articles that I wrote on this subject, and I am very proud of it. I put an awful lot of work into it. I didn't think it would be as demanding as it proved to be. Mind you, it is big, so it's probably my own fault, isn't it? But I had this clear project. So, I mean, as I sort of thought about the issues, it suddenly, I first of all I tell you the history, it's actually really important of how I got in. I mean, I've always wanted, for those of you who have actually seen my beginning of my dedication, I dedicated it to my aunt, because if it wasn't for her when I was a child for encouraging me, I come from the East End, you know, and especially in my age, not many people from the East End went to university, and if it hadn't been for her as a teacher giving me that initial inspiration when I was so young, I would never have gone to university and I'd never have written this book. So she's the initial impetus. And okay, the second impetus is my friend Elaine, I'm delighted to see her tonight, who said to me when I was in the sixth form dinner early was, let's go to university. I went to university, what's all this about? So I did, so that was wonderful. And the third is Glenn, my husband, who wrote this book on the battle in Seattle, its significance for education. And that was he'd published a lot of articles, that was his first actual book, and I read it and thought, wow, this is really important stuff. So with that, I joined a little group, I've been in the library information profession for a long time, but I joined a group which challenged the dominant paradigms of library and information work, called Information for Social Change. And I told the editor about Glenn's book, and he said, well, this sounds fascinating. Why don't I edit a special issue on globalisation and libraries and information and see what the implications are for libraries? So I did, and it all kind of took off from there. So I was quite delighted, actually, because I do, to be quite blunt with you, find the library profession, it's got some wonderful people and wonderful qualities, but I also sometimes find it a bit conformist. So I was delighted to discover there are actually people in the library profession around the world had actually investigated this topic of the GATS and the TRIPS. GATS, which stands for General Agreement in Trade and Services, and TRIPS, which stands for Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights, which are two important agreements being set up at the World Trade Organisation that threatens libraries and threaten education and various other areas. There are lots of agreements that are set up, but these two threaten them in particular. So I was delighted to find that there were actually people in our profession that were concerned about these issues. The International Federation for Library Association and Institutions and the European Bureau for Library and Information and Documentation Association, a long word, and Canada are also at the forefront. So with that, I then started writing articles about that. Then it's very exciting. I got a phone call out of the blue. I connected with someone from the World Development Movement, and the result of which was I got a phone call out of the blue from the BBC radio. So I'd like to go on a radio programme. So I did, and I spoke about, it was on You and Yours on Radio 4, and I spoke about what I thought could be the likely implication of the GATS for the public libraries, and I thought how it could threaten, at some point we might find our public libraries being turned into private companies and people having to pay for them. Now a lot of people say, oh, this is scaremongering talk, but I've given the example so many times of in the London Borough of Haringey, public library service was taken over by Instant Library, a company, for 3 years because it was deemed to have failed its best value regime and it was poor and everything. So the answer apparently was to let the private sector in. They ran it for 3 years and hallelujah, how amazing. They said it was all much better now, and it's actually gone back to the local authority control. But as far as I'm concerned, this is the first time a library service in England had ever been taken over by a private company, and it's a slippery slope. Once you get one in, you can get another in. And what I was saying on the radio programme is if private companies start to run our public libraries, then we might find that poor people, disabled people, these people are going to suffer because they might have to pay to go into their local library. And coming back to my history as a child, I loved my local library, you know. I was a passionate reader, and the thought of like that coming under threat is really what really got me going on the whole topic. So then I sort of moved on to look at trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, which is quite a lot more complicated subject. But I found it pretty interesting and also quite disturbing as I read the TRIPS agreement in some detail to find that it is purely about the trading of intellectual property rights. It covers lots of different intellectual property rights, copyright, patents, trademarks, geographical indicators. But the main drive of the agreement is to trade, trade, trade. It's not concerned with anything much other than that. So I was going on to the fact of what led me to my book project, and then suddenly it dawned on me, it really was like a flash of inspiration, that services and intellectual property rights were being transformed into international tradable commodities and were being sold in the marketplace. So things that were kind of dear to our heart that we might think are outside of the trading agenda, or being pushed into the trading agenda. And so then they're sold in the marketplace for profit. And by that means, you know, global capitalism is extended and perpetuated, and our fear for what's going to happen to ordinary people as this develops. And I mean, lots on the left, particularly on the gaps. Well, TRIPS as well, a lot of NGOs are very bothered about TRIPS in relation to patenting of drugs, and third world, they have all these herbs, and a lot of companies are patenting them and making money out of them. So a lot of the NGOs on the left have been involved in that. But not many have actually been looking what my area is new, and I'm looking at libraries specifically. And I think it's a bit sad because libraries can often seem to be a bit marginalised on the edge, but in actual fact they're crucial, surely, aren't they, to a civilised society.